7 animated villains ranked by how accurately they portray real mental health struggles. And before you say, they're just cartoons, let me stop you right there. Some of these villains are shockingly accurate portrayals of real psychological conditions. We're talking textbook symptoms, clinically recognizable patterns, and behaviors that mental health professionals would diagnose in a heartbeat. So today we're ranking 7 villains from cartoonish exaggeration to this is uncomfortably accurate, starting with the one who's basically a joke, and ending with the villain who could be used in psychology textbooks. But first, an important disclaimer. Mental health conditions are real, complex, and affect real people. We're analyzing fictional characters and how accurately they portray certain psychological patterns, not diagnosing real people or stigmatizing mental illness. These conditions deserve empathy and understanding. And if you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to a mental health professional. This video is educational entertainment, not medical advice. Now let's get into it. Here's how this ranking works. We're not measuring how evil these villains are or how much damage they caused. We're ranking them by psychological accuracy. How realistically do they portray actual mental health conditions? Would a therapist recognize these patterns? And if you showed their behavior to a clinical psychologist, would they be able to identify specific symptoms? Because here's the thing about mental health representation in animation. Most of it is terrible. Villains are usually just crazy or evil with no actual psychological depth. But every once in a while, intentionally or not, animation studios create a character whose behavior is so psychologically accurate that it's genuinely impressive. Or disturbing, usually both. So let's start with level 1, the villain whose mental health portrayal is basically a cartoon punchline. Here we have Captain Hook from Peter Pan, and his portrayal of a specific phobia is about as realistic as his ability to sword fight with one hand. Hook has a legitimate fear of crocodiles, specifically the one that ate his hand and wants to finish the job. And yes, specific phobias are real. Alligator and crocodile phobias exist. But Hook's reaction is pure cartoon panic designed for laughs, not an accurate portrayal of how phobias actually work.
Save me, please! Don't let him get me, please! Don't let him get me,
Real phobias involve intense, irrational fear that disrupts daily life. People with phobias develop avoidance behaviors, experience panic attacks, and often know their fear is disproportionate but just can't control it. Hook's fear is played entirely for comedy. He hears a ticking clock and immediately goes into slapstick panic mode, running in circles and screaming.
Don't be taken in by his will.
That's not a phobia. That's a cartoon gag. A realistic portrayal would show Hook's fear affecting his decision-making, his sleep, his ability to function as a pirate captain. Instead, we get him fainting and flailing while the crocodile literally smiles and winks at the camera. It's entertainment, not accuracy. That's why he's level 1. The condition is real, but the portrayal is pure exaggeration for comedic effect. But at least Hook has a reason for his fear. Level 2's villain is just selfish. At 2, we have Iago from Aladdin, and he displays some narcissistic traits and manipulative behaviors, but not quite enough to call it an accurate portrayal of narcissistic personality disorder. Iago is self-centered, manipulative, and constantly seeking validation and power. He complains about being overlooked, manipulates Jafar into increasingly extreme schemes, and switches sides the moment it benefits him.
Okay, you marry the princess, all right? And you become the sultan. And then we drop Papa-in-law and the little woman off a cliff. Yeah!
These are narcissistic behaviors, sure, but real NPD is more complex than just being selfish and manipulative. It involves a fragile sense of self-worth hidden behind grandiosity, a constant need for admiration, lack of empathy, and an inability to handle criticism without rage or complete emotional shutdown. Iago's just kind of a jerk who wants more power and complains a lot. He gets some things right. His manipulation of Jafar, playing on his insecurities and ambitions, is textbook narcissistic supply seeking. He needs Jafar to succeed so he can benefit. And he's willing to lie, scheme, and betray to get what he wants. But he lacks the deeper psychological complexity of a real narcissist. Iago is level 2 because he shows surface-level narcissistic traits without the clinical depth. He's a cartoon villain who's selfish and scheming, not a realistic portrayal of a personality disorder. But We're about to get into villains with much more accurate psychology. At level 3, we have Randall from Monsters Incorporated, and his inferiority complex is surprisingly realistic. Randall isn't evil because he's power-hungry or greedy. He's evil because he feels inadequate, and that inadequacy has twisted into pathological competition and cruelty. An inferiority complex is a persistent feeling of being less capable, less valuable, or less worthy than others, often leading to overcompensation through aggression, competition, or proving oneself at any cost. And that's Randall in a nutshell. He's not the best scarer. Sully is. And instead of accepting that or finding his own path, Randall becomes obsessed with being number one.
That's the last time I lose to you, Sullivan.
What makes this realistic is how his inferiority drives every decision. He cheats. He builds a scream extractor. He's willing to hurt children, betray his company, and destroy Sully's life, all because he can't handle being second place. That's textbook overcompensation for feelings of inadequacy. Real people with inferiority complexes often engage in similar behaviors, constantly comparing themselves to others, feeling threatened by anyone more successful, and lashing out when their sense of self-worth is challenged. Randall is level 3 because his psychology is recognizable and realistic. You've probably met someone like him, someone whose insecurity makes them cruel. But we're about to get into villains whose trauma is even more accurately portrayed. At level 4, we have Syndrome from The Incredibles. And his portrayal of rejection trauma and what psychologists call rejection-sensitive dysphoria is shockingly accurate. Syndrome's entire villain origin is a childhood rejection that he never processed. And it's a realistic portrayal of how early trauma can shape adult pathology. Rejection-sensitive dysphoria is an extreme emotional response to perceived rejection, often seen in people with ADHD, trauma histories, or certain personality patterns. It's not just feeling sad when rejected. It's intense, overwhelming emotional pain that can lead to anger, revenge fantasies, and even a complete restructuring of self-identity around that rejection. And that's exactly what happens to Buddy. Mr. Incredible tells him he works alone.
Just give me one chance.
Fly home, buddy. I work alone.
And Buddy doesn't just feel disappointed. He feels destroyed. And instead of processing that pain, he spends decades building an identity around it. If I can't be your sidekick, I'll become the villain who proves you were wrong to reject me. What makes this realistic is the disproportionate response. A healthy person would be disappointed and move on. Syndrome builds his entire life around revenge, creates technology to kill superheroes, and endangers thousands of people. All because a man he admired told him no when he was 10 years old. That's not rational. That's trauma response. That's rejection sensitivity turned into obsession. Syndrome is level 4 because his psychology is clinically recognizable. Therapists work with people who've experienced similar patterns. Childhood rejection leading to adult revenge fantasies. Identity built around proving someone wrong. Inability to process and move past emotional wounds. It's dark, it's realistic, and it's surprisingly accurate for a Pixar movie. But as accurate as Syndrome's rejection trauma is, the next 3 villains are even more psychologically precise. At level 5, we have Scar from The Lion King, and his portrayal of depression manifesting as chronic resentment and bitterness is more accurate than most people realize. Scar isn't just ambitious, he's deeply depressed, and that depression has curdled into resentment, hopelessness, and eventually destructive behavior. Depression doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like anger, like bitterness, like I'm surrounded by idiots, while lying in the shadows doing nothing. Scar exhibits textbook depressive symptoms, social withdrawal, feelings of worthlessness, chronic dissatisfaction, lack of motivation, and a worldview where nothing will ever get better, so why bother trying? I'll never be king isn't just villain motivation, it's learned helplessness, a core feature of depression. He's convinced his situation is hopeless, that Mufasa will always be better, that he'll always be second. And instead of seeking help or finding meaning elsewhere, he lets that hopelessness fester until it becomes rage. And here's what's really accurate. Depressive episodes can lead to destructive decision-making. When you feel hopeless and worthless for long enough, some people turn that pain inward, others turn it outward. Scar, well, turns it outward. He murders his brother, exiles his nephew, and destroys the Pride Lands, not because he's purely evil, but because his depression has convinced him that nothing matters anyway. Even after he becomes king, he's still miserable. The kingdom falls apart because he doesn't care. He's not enjoying power. He's existing in the same depressive state, now with a crown. That's real. That's how depression works. External circumstances change, but the internal hopelessness remains. Scar is level 5 because his depression is clinically recognizable. Mental health professionals see this pattern: chronic dissatisfaction, resentment toward more successful people, learned helplessness leading to destructive choices. Disney accidentally created a realistic portrayal of depression in a villain, and it's uncomfortably accurate. At level 6, we have Lotso from Toy Story 3. And his portrayal of complex abandonment trauma and reactive attachment disorder is textbook accurate. Lotso's entire personality is built around one traumatic event, being replaced by his owner. And his response, his emotional shutdown, his never be hurt again mentality, and his cruelty toward others is a realistic portrayal of how trauma reshapes psychology. Abandonment trauma, especially in early development, can lead to reactive attachment disorder, a condition where someone becomes unable to form healthy emotional bonds. They build walls, refuse to trust, and often hurt others before they can be hurt first. And that's Lotso. He was loved, then abandoned, and his brain said, never again. What makes this portrayal so accurate is the emotional numbing. Lotso doesn't feel remorse. He doesn't feel empathy. He's not sad or angry. He's just cold. When other toys try to connect with him, he shuts them down. When they're in danger, he doesn't care. He's completely detached because attachment means vulnerability, and vulnerability means pain. And here's the clinically accurate part. He rationalizes it. We're all just trash waiting to be thrown away. Isn't villainy. It's his worldview shaped by trauma. He genuinely believes love is a lie, that attachment is pointless, and that everyone will eventually be abandoned. So he creates a system at Sunnyside where he's in control. No one gets close to him, and he can't be hurt again. Therapists work with people who've experienced similar trauma. Childhood abandonment, especially when combined with replacement, can lead to lifelong attachment issues, emotional numbing, and an inability to trust. Lotso's behavior, his coldness, his cruelty, it's all a trauma response, and Pixar portrayed it with shocking accuracy. Lotso is level 6 because his psychology is clinically precise. This is what complex trauma looks like. This is how abandonment rewires the brain, and it's one of the most realistic portrayals of trauma in animation. But there's one villain who's even more accurate. And at level 7, the most psychologically accurate villain in animation, we have Mother Gothel from Tangled. And I need you to understand something. This woman is a textbook, clinically accurate portrayal of covert narcissistic personality disorder and emotional abuse. Every single line she says, every manipulation tactic, every gaslighting technique is something a therapist would recognize immediately. Let's break down why this is so accurate. Narcissistic personality disorder involves a pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, lack of empathy, and exploitation of others. Covert narcissists specifically hide behind a facade of caring, playing the victim, and using guilt and fear to control. And that's Mother Gothel in every scene. Mother Knows Best isn't just a villain song, it's a masterclass in narcissistic abuse tactics. She doesn't say, I forbid you to leave. She says, the world is dark and scary, you're too weak and naive, everyone will hurt you, only I can protect you. That's isolation through fear. That's making the victim believe they're incapable without the abuser. Then there's the gaslighting. When Rapunzel questions her, Gothel doesn't argue. She plays the victim. After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me? She makes Rapunzel feel guilty for having boundaries. That's textbook narcissistic guilt tripping. And here's the most disturbing part. She doesn't love Rapunzel. She loves what Rapunzel provides. The hair, the youth, the control. The moment Rapunzel's hair is cut and loses its power, Gothel doesn't even look at her. She looks at the hair. And then she ages and dies without her narcissistic supply. She has nothing. That's clinically accurate. Narcissists don't love people. They love what people give them. Therapists who work with survivors of narcissistic abuse watch Tangled and see their clients' parents. The isolation, the gaslighting, the I'm the victim here, the conditional love, the exploitation disguised as protection, every tactic is real. Every line is something an actual narcissistic parent would say. Mother Gothel is level 7 because she's not just accurate, she's a teaching tool. Psychology students could study her character to learn how covert narcissism and emotional abuse operate. Disney created a villain that's so psychologically precise, she's genuinely disturbing to anyone who's experienced this kind of abuse. And the scariest part, she thinks she's the good guy. She genuinely believes she's protecting Rapunzel, that she's the loving mother, that Rapunzel is ungrateful. That's NPD. No self-awareness, no empathy, just a belief that they're always right and everyone else is wrong. And that's the ranking, from Captain Hook's cartoon Phobia to Mother Gothel's textbook narcissistic personality disorder. 7 villains, 7 mental health portrayals, ranging from pure comedy to uncomfortable clinical accuracy. Here's what this ranking teaches us. Mental health representation in animation matters. When it's done poorly, it stigmatizes real conditions and turns them into punchlines. But when it's done well, even accidentally, it can help people recognize patterns, understand behavior, and in some cases, see their own experiences reflected on screen. Scar's depression, Lotso's trauma, and Gothel's narcissism aren't just villain traits. They're real psychological conditions that real people live with. And while these characters are fictional and their actions are extreme, the underlying psychology is often accurate. That's powerful, that's meaningful, and it's worth analyzing. So the next time you watch an animated movie and a villain does something that feels uncomfortably real, there's probably a psychological reason for it. And sometimes, that accuracy is what makes them truly terrifying. From cartoons to clinical accuracy, animation studios have portrayed mental health in wildly different ways. Which villain's psychology shocked you most? And if you've experienced any of these patterns in real life, please know that help is available. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and remember, mental health matters, even in cartoons. Thanks for watching.